Welcome to Growing Startups, where we talk to growth leaders and marketing professionals about how to drive sustainable growth from the ground up. I'm your host, Evelyn Cools, and I lead marketing for tech startups. I'm excited to share these candid conversations about marketing, culture, collaboration, and everything else that makes startups grow. Today, I'm super excited to be talking to our guest, Emi Agg. We actually went to high school together in different years and haven't really talked that much since recently, but she's been doing a bunch of super cool things within the startup world. She's been like one of the first hires at a startup, but has also worked at LinkedIn and has now started her own marketing agency. So I'm just really excited to chat today about everything that you're seeing. Would you mind starting by giving us a little intro on your background and what you do right now at Do It Right Marketing?
Yeah, hi. I'm very excited to be here, so thank you for having me. Um, I have a very complicated past. I'm a Hungarian American. I was born in Chicago, and then for my high school years, I was in Budapest. And then I did my undergrad and my master's in London. And then between my two degrees, I actually lived in Paris and worked there. And I also worked in London. And then so when I was working in London, I decided that I'm, working in I think they call it Silicon Roundabout there. So like London does have a big tech hub, but I was like, what's the next step after that? And I decided that the next step would be San Francisco, which is Silicon Valley. And so that's where I ended up next. And I worked at different startups and LinkedIn as well. And then COVID hit, and I feel like everyone went through a kind of like a reset of okay, what are my priorities? Where do I see myself? And I actually moved to Budapest, where I am today. So I feel like this is really cool. I've done a few podcasts, but I've never done it with being on the other side of the world at the same time. And so I moved to Budapest, and here I started working at a big company at Nokia. So it's a Finn company. And after about almost 2 years, I decided to start my own marketing agency. And so Do It Right Marketing is actually a growth marketing strategy consultancy. So I consult with various organizations, be it startups or like startup accelerators. I also work with mid-sized companies, and I help them with their growth strategy and, really just building strategies from the ground up, figuring out what are their goals, where do they want to go, and how can they achieve that with marketing.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
that's
that's me in a
quite the
very quick.
background. Yeah, that's super cool. And I remember we were actually also studying in London around the same time and we briefly met
Yeah.
there, but we haven't really like been in touch that much since then, but we both I feel like have kind of a similar track record in, kind of switching it up, having a less traditional background, especially with the startup side of things. I feel like it's just such an interesting place to be. It's very much not like a corporate marketing role. So I guess I'm kind of curious, and we'll get into all the marketing talk a little bit later too. But what made you want to start your own agency from, I mean, going from like a big company like Nokia and previously you said LinkedIn. What made you want to, I guess, return to these startup roots and also just go off
hmm
on your own?
Well, what was something that's interesting is that I feel like everyone is a growth marketer or focuses on demand gen or marketing strategy in the US. So being
Mm,
special doing that, I feel like is very hard in the US because a lot of people are very capable and that is their skill set. And so I never thought, like, I would have never wanted to start something like this in the US because I feel like there's not much of a need for it because it's a pretty saturated market. And then when I came to Hungary, I actually realized that I feel like growth marketing is more of a mindset, and this whole mindset is missing. So I mean, hope this person doesn't listen to the podcast, but I went to this party at the very beginning when I moved to Budapest, so fresh back from San Francisco, and I met this girl. And I asked her what she does, and she's like, "Oh, I'm a marketer." I'm like, "Oh, cool. And so, which part of marketing? Like, what do you do?" And she's like, "Oh, well, marketing." And she just kept repeating marketing and couldn't define what she actually does, not
Mm,
knowing that I myself am a marketer. And I like tried to, I was like, "Okay, so you do like social media, or," and I pretty soon realized that a lot of people are kind of more generalists and they kind of do everything, but I feel like you can't really do everything well. You have to,
mm,
I feel like you can be, and I know we're going to get into this to talk about like
yeah.
generalists versus specialists, but it was a bit of an eye opener to realize that this is actually a part of marketing that is missing, a part of marketing that really needs, like all companies need it, big and small. And I did go into Nokia thinking like, okay, so I'm going to take all the things I learned in San Francisco and the way, the startup world, or, LinkedIn works
Mm.
in San Francisco, this very, new tech way of going about things. And I was like, I'm gonna, make that kind of change at Nokia. And it doesn't really happen like that. And so I think what I needed was kind of a space where I could create change like that. And I do see that with my clients today, that I am able to make the sort of changes, or drive them towards the type of direction that is helpful for them to be able to grow. So that's kind of how I got there. Of, when something really frustrates you, of like, oh my goodness, there's the need for this and people aren't getting it. That's kind of what makes me want to take that step and be like, okay, let's solve this problem.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. And also, I haven't actually been part of a big company. I haven't been part of a big marketing team, but that's kind of what I envision. I think that the beautiful thing about being part of a startup, while it has a lot of challenges and you end up doing a crazy amount of stuff even outside of marketing, especially when you're on like a super small team, it's you just have so much impact and your input is really valued and you can actually make something happen. Like you can make change happen for a company, which is just such a cool thing to be able to do and is so fulfilling. So I can absolutely see where you're coming from there. I'm excited to get into especially maybe the like European versus US mindset, all that kind of stuff. Before I feel like we could like jump straight into it from everything you've already talked about. But I do want to quickly ask you for something that I do at the beginning of every podcast, because I feel like, especially people that work at startups, we often kind of forget to take care of ourselves or see ourselves as like part of sustainable growth. And you have to, take care of yourself to be able to run a company well or be one of those like core team members that's making things happen. Do you have a favorite wellness practice or ritual or something that you do frequently to just keep you grounded?
I guess it's running. And then even when I go running, I'm very type A because a lot of times I'm listening to Audible as I'm running, and then I'm like, I'm reading, and so I'm learning and I'm running, so I'm getting a workout. But that really, really helps me mentally as well. And so I run outside. I don't like treadmills. I do have a Peloton at home, and I hardly ever use it because it's the fact that when you leave your home is what really helps you feel more reset. And I live right next to this island that's like right in the middle of Budapest. And so I go run around it. It's a 5 kilometer run. So it's like the perfect amount for, like a 30-minute workout. And so that really helps reset mentally. And then if I'm also listening to Audible at the same time, then I'm like, great. It could be a self-help book or anything. It's
That's a
it's
double
helping
win
me in
for
many
sure.
ways. Yeah.
Yeah, the island, so it's an island. I think I actually remember this from living there when I was a teenager, but is it an island in the Danube River?
Yes, and they have a running route around it.
Mm,
So that also makes it really nice that it's like better for your knees. And
yeah,
yeah,
I love
yeah,
that.
it's
I'm
nice.
very into trail running, so I can definitely see that the running side of things is it's such a nice way to clear your head. I love that wellness ritual. Let's get into some of the stuff that we wanted to talk about. Let's start with you already kind of mentioned this, but coming from the US and then, you know, seeing what the startup market is like in Europe, seeing what the mindset is like in Europe. I'm originally from Belgium, so I very much see this as well. And I especially see this with companies that are coming over here for the first time and really needing to adapt to like the American way. Talk to me a little bit about what you've seen there.
Hmm. Wow, that's a very loaded
It's a big
question. There's a lot
question.
of things. Also, I feel like I'm when I talk about compared to the US, I will always be comparing it mainly to the San Francisco way of thinking. So I realize that that's also very different, or people from SF will want to think that, but I personally agree that there it's just a completely different mindset and way of thinking. So when I'm comparing it to the US, I'm comparing it to that. But one of the things that I think is a big one is simply, I guess, like believing in yourself. So I mentor a lot of startups or even maybe let's say entrepreneurs who are on their way to, found a startup. So like very early on. And one of the main takeaways that or main pieces of feedback that we give as mentors to these startups is the fact that you need to speak as if this will happen. And I feel like the US is really good at that, that, they can be so confident, even just the way you walk,
Mhm.
compared to a lot of Europeans. And I do think that that helps. Like, if you believe what you're selling, people will buy it. If you're like, oh, we might be selling chocolate in about a year, potentially, maybe, you won't buy that. But if someone's like, oh, in a year we'll be selling chocolate, you're like, okay, yeah, I believe I can get behind that. So I think that's one of the things is just like mindset of yes, I can, and believing that you actually can. Um, and then I had another one. Oh yes, the just the can-do attitude. So like if there is something that doesn't work, let's figure out how to fix it. And it could be a scrappy way, it could be, really roundabout way of, oh, or let's say we don't want to be paying for some service. So how can we, skip paying for that service and kind of figure out a workaround that could automate it instead of what, like there are always ways to solve. Like there's creative problem solving skills that I think is a big thing in the US that sometimes I think is missing in Europe. Like, oh, they said we can't. And so
Yeah.
like the topic's closed. I'm like, what? Like there is a way. We just have to find it. And so I think that's another one that comes to mind. I don't know what else you were thinking about.
No, I honestly think those are the main things that are on top of my mind as well. I think that can-do attitude that you talk about is so prevalent here, and it's really inspiring to be part of a team that has that can-do attitude, and it makes you a lot more just like, let's take this thing on and figure out how to do it. Maybe we have to hack some stuff together in the beginning, but at least we can test it out and see if it works. And then after the fact, you can make sure that it's all done right and you have like processes in place. But just that initial like, let's just try this. I think that's a very American way of thinking in business
Yeah.
in particular. And I love that. And then the other thing you said about, yeah, just like general mindset and confidence. I think as a Belgian, we are very modest, like overly modest, sometimes like to a fault. And I think that's something that I've seen a lot. People come in and they're just, they don't really want to sell what they do, even
Hmm.
though what they've done a lot of the times is sometimes it's really impressive, like the numbers they're bringing in when they're trying to fundraise. They have something like super solid before they even take that step, but then they just don't really know how to sell it in the way that's important here. And I think it's especially important to thinking about like if you are going to come to the US and you want to build out a team, people here are going to look for that kind of leadership. Like it's for me as someone that's, kind of a first time marketing hire at startups, that's what my role has become. I really look for like, is this founder someone who I can really like look at and see, oh, I love your vision. Like, let's
Hmm.
go do this thing together is super important for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I also think that just generally the US is really good at both marketing but also customer experience. And like putting the customer first. And I shouldn't get into my horrible
Yeah.
experience of customer experience yesterday at a restaurant, but honestly, that would have never happened in the US because it's I realize that sometimes the customer is always right can be, to a fault that it's just a bit extreme because sometimes the customer simply might not be right, but
Yeah.
you can't like raise your voice with the customer or not think about, a customer journey that's optimal for the customer. And like the fact that you have to put yourself in the shoes of this other person and think about like what would they do if they don't have the knowledge bias that I do. And I think that's another thing that the US does really well is they always think like, okay, so who's our target audience? Who's our customer? How would they think? How would they feel? What would they do next? And I feel like that's a really strong way to build a strong product or service. That's then easier to market because you're selling something good.
Yeah, and you also, I mean, that's like the core of marketing, right? Is understanding who
Yes.
you're even selling to. So, yeah, I think that's a really tough one sometimes for people to get right. Yeah, being customer centric is so important for really everything. Like every single role at the startup should be very customer centric. And that's like something I'm super passionate about is also giving a very cohesive brand experience for customers. So like their first touch point with marketing should feel like very similar to what they're experiencing with sales, whether it's like the wording, the messaging that they're hearing or the visuals that they're
Hmm.
getting. Like if they're seeing a pitch deck that's or like a demo deck that is different from like what our marketing website looks like, that's already such like a
Yeah.
jarring experience. Is that something that you see? I think it's something that like happens a lot in early stage startups, but is that something you see a lot
Hmm.
too?
So I feel like you're like, this is something I preach all the time, like exactly what you're saying to be consistent. And the brand experience doesn't end with marketing, it's all of the customer facing teams and throughout the whole journey. And it has to be consistent and you have to be using the same visuals and tone of voice and whatnot. And do I see that? You're asking if I see people actually doing this within startups in Hungary or?
I guess like is it something that people struggle with and is it something you usually go in to like tell them
Mhm.
about how important it is?
Well, I definitely do think that this is a hard one because it means that you need to have very good cross-functional alignment. And especially the
Mm-hmm.
larger your team, the more opinions, like there needs to be, and this is why I always preach that it needs to be a revenue team versus a sales and a marketing and a customer success team. Like these all need to be one team because they're all driving towards the same goal. And if they're all driving towards the same goal and they're all under the same leader potentially, then it really, really helps to stay more aligned. And that will help from a customer experience perspective as well, plus a bunch of other things, but from the customer experience side too.
Yeah, I think you're really touching on culture there as well, which is also just such an interesting conversation to have. But like, what's a good startup culture? And I think this is something that's sometimes really tough for founders because they start it as like one or two people. It's often just the founders. They're all, taking on different things like, a non-marketing founder might be doing marketing and they might be doing product and CS. Like they're doing all these things and then they start growing and they realize, okay, it's time to hire people full time for these things. But now you also have to think about like what culture am I building here?
Hmm.
And I think it's sometimes overlooked or just kind of difficult to know like how do I even start this when you don't have, that's like not why you initially even began this company is you get thrown
Yeah.
into this like leadership position.
Hmm. Yeah, I think this one's a really hard one, and I have a lot of opinions. One, I definitely think it's more important, especially in the early phase, to be hiring for people with a growth mindset, people who want to learn, and people who have this can-do attitude. Hiring people that are experts in certain fields, I don't think is necessarily the way to go in the beginning. I think that's at a bit of a more of a later stage when you do this like refresh of like, okay, now we're going to bring in more senior people, put them in more leadership positions and potentially rethink how we're doing things. But I do think in the beginning, it's very good to have people who just have this attitude of, I can do it, I can get scrappy, I can work across different teams. So, like, let's say I was hired as a marketer, but you're doing some sales and some customer success, and sometimes you're the one who's carrying all the juices that you need for the week for the team or whatever. Like, I
Yeah.
remember in San Francisco, just like having a lot of physical labor parts to my job. And then people would like on the street be lovely and help me push the cart that I was like pushing all this whatever in. And so I think that you need this sort of mindset, otherwise things won't get done. Um, and also they will learn. And if you have this attitude of I'll learn or I'll figure it out, I think that's like who you want to be with, who you want to be working with. However, I also think that a lot of times, and I don't know if you've experienced this, but a lot of startups want to hire culture fits, and there's this phrase of adding culture adds. And I do think that sometimes when you're only adding culture fits, you end up with this like, oh, we're all a family, oh, we're all friends, which can turn really toxic because this is still work. You still need those boundaries. And so, what we would do at a startup that I used to work for is we would go out for lunch and then we'd vote after the lunch whether we would hire the person that like came with us. Like this was part of their interview process. And I think that's awful because like, are we really hiring this person because they're like fun to be around? Like that you'll feel that during the interview process of like, can I work with this person? You don't need to be able to drink or eat with this person. This person needs to be good when it comes to whatever you're hiring them for, which in this case would be marketing. They don't need to be your best friend. And that can happen, that they do become great friends, but I don't think startups should be hiring for that reason. Because then, yeah, I don't think in the long term it's a healthy culture.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And also when you're just adding people who you, I guess, vibe with, I think there's a limit to like you might not be thinking out of the box as much as you could be. You might not be
Hmm.
adding people who have like opposing opinions and might ruffle some feathers, but actually they have really good ideas. So having people that, come from different backgrounds, have different ideas about things, I think is really good. And as long as you know how to like respectfully work together and, brainstorm together and are open to each other's ideas, I think, the more diversity like that, the better. The juice box story or like carrying people's juices just reminded me of yes, there is like a lot of manual labor also in marketing. I feel like depending obviously on what you're doing, but the previous startup I was at, we did a lot of conferences and basically there, like I was the person shipping all the stuff for the booth. But it was very expensive to, and as a startup, you're like trying to cut costs. This was part of my marketing budget.
Yeah.
It was very expensive to store things at the conference location beforehand. So I would be like carrying this massive banner as like a separate piece of luggage and all of our swag, all of our flyers. Like you do some crazy stuff when
Yeah.
you're at an early stage startup. I completely
Yeah.
agree that it's really about people's attitude and are you willing to learn? Like you said, not really hiring a specialist. I think it can be really easy to, especially if you're like a founder that's maybe done some marketing and you feel like, oh, I think this is the direction we should be going. Like maybe we're super focused on content. I think our community needs blog posts and newsletters, for example. And then you go and hire like an amazing copywriter. But as
Hmm.
a first marketing hire, that's very limiting. And you're really going to want to experiment with a bunch of different things rather than commit to this one, like, this is how we're going to do marketing now. Yeah, I think having someone who's a bit more of a generalist, but maybe has like one or two really standout skills and then is willing to just learn everything else as it goes. I think that's really like powerful as a first marketing hire. What are your thoughts on that?
So my manager at Nokia, she actually always talked about T-shaped marketers, which means that, you're generals because like you kind of have a basic knowledge of a wide part of, marketing, like product marketing, demand gen, whatever it might be, something creative. And then you have one specific skill set that you have super, super deep knowledge of, let's say like SEO. So you have all this like basic knowledge of everything else, but there's like one thing that you're an expert at. And in this case, or you have like stronger skill set in this case, I do think hiring someone who's more of a T-shaped marketer is a cool way to go about it because in the beginning, they are great as a generalist. And then once the organization starts to grow, you can actually put them into a role where they can be a specialist in a given field. And obviously you want to hire someone within, you might want to think about like, okay, so they're a T-shaped within this or this segment, and like, what do we actually need potentially in the long run? So you can already be thinking about it, but it doesn't really matter, I would say, because they will be adaptable to the way your organization grows. And also, I think that as a leader, it's good to be a T-shaped marketer because it's awesome if you kind of understand what everyone within your team is working on. And you don't need to be a specialist in all of them because that's why you have people under you because they are the specialists in those fields. And so I do think that hiring someone who's more of this type of marketer is the way to go as a first hire.
I think it's great that you say that too about they'll become a really good leader in the organization because I think that's a really important piece. Even if you're not hiring a bunch of like full-time marketers, they'll probably be working with contractors on things that they,
Mm-hmm.
aren't as specialized in or they just don't have the bandwidth for because being a one-person marketing team is kind of grueling. But if they know a little bit about everything, they're also going to be able to guide those contractors or have those conversations with a PR agency and, kind of have a general understanding of what this even is. So, yeah, I think T-shaped marketers, that's a good way to go. Do you think it's
Mm-hmm.
important for people to have startup experience versus corporate experience when they're like a first hire at a startup?
Well, so I think a lot of people do it both ways. So myself, I did my first like longer internship at a big company at Orange in Paris. And so that was my first like longer work experience. And then I went on and worked in a bunch of different startups of different stages. So sometimes I was, the third person in the office, or sometimes I was, I don't know, the 15th person. And then there was another one where I was around, I think, 200. So I had a bunch of like different stages. And then I went to work at LinkedIn. And what it did for me is when I started working at LinkedIn, I realized through all of the different projects that I worked on there is that all my gut feelings that I had been using in my startup experience, they were right or they were, in the right direction. And then at LinkedIn, because there was just so much more, I mean, there was a much bigger team to start with, and the fact that there was just a lot more budget to test things out or to have the right tools. And so I think that really helped me understand like, okay, my gut feeling is usually spot on, but it also helped me to then not be so specialized in a specific, part of my marketing, that I was able to work with a wide range of marketers because obviously at a bigger organization like LinkedIn, you're going to have very set roles. But this helped me really understand what everyone was working on and know what to ask for, what to question, like, are you sure you can't do that? Because I used to be able to do that. Like there must be a way to be able to do that. So I think coming from a startup really helped me have experience to be able to lead projects because I had this understand or deeper understanding of things and more like hands-on experience because obviously when you go into a larger organization you stop touching tools and you're not
Mm.
in that day to day anymore, and so you kind of have to like use the skills that or the experience you had previously to potentially ask those questions. But then a lot of people do it the other way around as well, which I think is also nice because a big organization really gives you the structure of how to think about things. So, to be fully honest, I do think that most of the knowledge that I currently use throughout my consulting is skills that I learned, or is the structured way of thinking that I learned at LinkedIn, because they were so structured of like, what's your goal? What's your true north? Do all your goals drive towards that? Are you sure you want to be running this activation if it's not helping your true north metric? Like we would question everything, and everything was very, very structured. And I think that's really helpful in a startup environment because it helps you focus, it helps you be more efficient, helps you do the right things. And so that's also, I think, a cool journey is to start at the larger organization and then go into a smaller one and be able to bring that culture with you to help create some of those, processes that might be more efficient. So I don't think there's a right or wrong journey
Yeah.
either way.
I think that's a good point. I think as a maybe, if there's any marketers listening who are thinking of becoming like the founding marketer or the first full-time marketing hire at a startup is you're kind of coming in with no rules in place, which is a blessing and can also be a curse because you come in and there's literally you could do anything. You're going to have to start building the foundations like what metrics do we even care about? How do I even just get everything set up? It's a lot
Hmm.
to do. You want to do like the bare minimum. Of course, you're not going to operate like a huge organization when you're a one person marketer, but you do have to take on a lot of that. Like you have to create that structure for yourself and for the team. That's a huge part of, being the first person at a startup.
And do you feel like you, as a first marketing hire, have to convince leadership that it's worth it to really invest in marketing? Because I feel like a lot of times they hire marketers and they're not really well, and this happens in the case where the founding team is not traditionally a marketer. So they come from a different like they might be in finance or product or whatnot, and they know that they need marketing, so they hire a marketer, but then they're not actually convinced of the value of marketing. Do you
Oh my
run into
gosh.
that? Because I feel like that can be very frustrating and takes a lot of energy to just convince people that marketing is worth it, and you're not even spending time doing it, you're still convincing people.
Yeah, I mean, this happens so much. I think a lot of people get to that stage where they've kind of hired everyone else, and now they're like, okay, I think it's time to add marketing to the mix. I've been very like blessed with companies where the founder is like, "Oh, I know I've done my research on marketing even though I'm not a marketer myself. I like follow marketing people on LinkedIn and I know the general, language around what we need." They very much see like, "Okay, this is very valuable and I'll still have to explain myself," which I think everyone in any role, especially when you're the first time hire for your department, is going to have to do that. You're the kind of first person setting the rules for where you're going. But it is very difficult to convince someone of the value of marketing in the very beginning because some things can be you can see results very quickly with some things, but then other things are a much longer play. And I think that's really the hardest part is convincing people of, why is it important for us to like focus on our brand and have a website that tells a good story, even if it doesn't instantly increase conversions or
Hmm.
invest in content. We're positioning ourselves as a thought leader, but that doesn't happen overnight. So I think those are
Yeah.
the types of like the pieces of marketing that can be really hard to like convince people of the value in the beginning for sure.
Hmm. And budget.
And
I feel
budget,
like
that's
that's the
another
worst
thing.
thing. Yeah, when it's like either it's not been predefined, so you're the one who's defining it, but then it's like, what is this actually going to bring in? And then especially in the beginning, it doesn't bring in things for a long time.
People want to see ROI like instantly
Hmm.
on marketing spend. So I think something that I try to do when I first go into an organization is I try to get some quick wins, like really understand what's been working if they have been doing anything marketing related, just, try
Hmm.
to like improve on it and get some quick wins on things that they'll immediately see like, oh, this is, valuable for us. And then you can start
Hmm.
adding stuff here or there or experimenting with new things and always just being like open and transparent about what you're trying to do. Being like, hey, I think this is something that could be worth it. I've done my research. Initially, I don't want to spend a lot of money, but I think I need this initial investment to just test it out and then we
Hmm.
can see if it's, we can go from there. Also, coming with like a bunch of information ready rather than having an idea and not really having it thought through has been a lot better to kind of do it that way.
Yeah. And I guess it's also interesting, like, what are the red flags that someone who's interviewing to be a first marketing hire, like, what should they be looking for? Because I have
Yeah.
two that I kind of I think about it. I'm not a first time marketing hire in this case, but more, the external consultant coming in and seeing like, is this a red flag for me? Like, do I want to work with them? And so one of the things that I always think about is if it's a B2B solution, if they don't have a sales team, that always really worries me. I'm like, so I'm going to be driving all these leads and the CEO is going to be following up. Like, what? Like, I need someone who's, a sales expert who's going to be helping out here. So that's one of the things that I say from a B2B perspective, I would consider. And the other thing is that when I'm mentoring startups, a lot of times, they have to put together a proposal for what they want to be spending their budget on. And for one, investors don't like it when you're spending most of your budget on marketing. But two, for a marketer, I do think that should be a red flag because that might mean that they're not investing enough money into their product. And that is, if your product is strong, it's going to be very easy to market it and sell it versus if your product is mm, and you're spending all your budget on marketing, then you're going to have a much harder time being very efficient with that budget. So I actually don't necessarily think that not a lot of marketing, like not putting a bunch of your budget into marketing is a red flag. I actually think it's probably a good thing because being more product led growth is probably a healthier organization to work in. I don't know if you have any that you think about that you're like,
Yeah,
oh, nope.
I totally agree with both of those. I think especially the first one where I mean this kind of goes into both, I guess, is looking at the whole picture and who you're going to be working with and are these people that you think are just good at what they do and do they have a vision that you're excited about as well? And then I think the other thing that, we already talked about is just do they see the value of marketing outside of just you being a little like I don't know. I think marketing often gets put into this role where they become everyone's little content assistant. Or like sales needs a one
Hmm.
pager, or customer success needs something with our branding, or you know, product needs something for product marketing. And I think it's easy to fall into that trap where marketing becomes like the one that's just doing stuff for everyone else without having their own really clear goals and strategy and the way that they're going to grow the business.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out if they have a bigger vision for marketing versus just, we think we need a marketer and then you're going to kind of be in that kind of role, I feel like.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, so you're not like sales led. Because I feel
Yeah.
like a lot of times that's what happens, that you're kind of more of a sales led organization, which can be very frustrating for a marketing team.
Man, I think we covered so many topics already. I think we could talk forever probably, but yeah, thank you so much, Emmy, for coming on and chatting through these things. I think a lot of this has been top of mind for me, so it's just cool to like bounce off someone else and see, what they're experiencing. I did want to ask you, is there something that as we close this off, something that you're excited about both in your personal and in your professional life?
Well, I have one that's kind of in between those two. So I recently took on a new role as the president of the board for a women's group. So it's called Business Women's Network, and I'm very excited to be part of this organization and to work with very, very talented people to really focus on creating. I don't know if you can hear the ambulance. Can you?
No,
No?
you're all
Okay,
good.
cool. Then I'll continue.
AirPods are great
So
with noise
yeah.
cancellation.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. Okay, cool. So the organization focuses on creating collaboration between women who work in business, and it really focuses on just having a strong, supportive community. And also, we do a bunch of like learning, so like bettering ourselves. We have a yoga session coming up soon, but we do a bunch of like more professional focused ones as well. And I just think that that's something that's very important in Budapest because moving to Budapest, it has been a bit of a culture shock from working as a woman experience compared to what it was like in San Francisco. And so I'm very excited to hopefully, make some change within, a certain part of women in Budapest because I think there's a lot of potential still there.
Yeah, that's really great. I think I definitely would have the same type of culture shock if I were to go back to Belgium, I think. I mean, it's organizations like that and people like you that, change it. So that's super cool. Last question is just where can people connect with you?
Yeah, I post very regularly on LinkedIn. I mean, being a LinkedIn alumni, it wouldn't be right if I wasn't. But yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, also on my website at doitrightmarketing.com. And then I have an Instagram too, but I think LinkedIn's the best place to connect.
LinkedIn's the way to go. I'm trying to be more active there too, but it's tough. I feel like there's like a whole influencer side of LinkedIn now that I haven't really tapped into yet. It's a crazy world.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you, Emmy, so much for coming on the podcast, and you'll have to keep me posted on how everything goes and just excited to stay connected. Thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you.